Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. I hope you had a wonderful holiday break. I have been doing a lot of reading over these holidays and I'm so excited to share with you what I've been reading, so let's dive right in. The first book I have to share with you is called The Hospital by the River by Catherine Hamlin. Oh, I'm talking about this book first because it was so unbelievably life-changing. Catherine and her husband Reg moved to Ethiopia from Australia in the 1960s as doctors to set up a midwife hospital there. And this book is basically just about their experience and their life story of being a doctor in Ethiopia. They ended up staying there for over 40 years. Once they moved there, they didn't kind of want to come home. This book was so unbelievably amazing to read for one main reason, which was that Catherine and her husband Reg focused mainly on fistula patients. What is a fistula? I didn't know until I read this book either. There are a few different kind of fistulas that can occur throughout the body, but the one that Catherine and Reg were focusing on and healing while they were in Ethiopia occurs when women have an obstructed labor and don't get medical help in time. What happens is basically the baby is obstructed in some way during labor and so it's not coming out. So a woman will be in labor for about 3 days straight until the baby dies. After that, she's still in labor for another few days while the baby basically decomposes inside her until it's small enough to finally be expelled. This prolonged labor of sometimes almost up to a week also means that the blood supply to the lower abdomen is cut off, resulting in tissue death. A fistula occurs when the tissue between the bladder and the vagina or the rectum and the vagina basically dies, and so you're left with a hole, and the hole is called the fistula. This means that either urine or feces, or sometimes both, will leak into the vagina and then out of the body permanently forever. It is quite possibly the most horrific thing that can happen after a stillborn baby and a week's worth of labor as well. It's just the saddest thing that can happen. And of course it can happen to any woman that doesn't have access to modern medicine, but because Catherine and Reg have moved to Ethiopia, they were talking about the Ethiopian women in particular. It also quite often means that the husband would leave these women because they were incontinent, and they would quite often be ostracized from society as well because of the smell that they had. It's just the most heartbreaking thing, and it's particularly heartbreaking because with some basic medical intervention like a cesarean or forceps to pull the baby out, fistulas would just not occur. But because a lot of these Ethiopian women don't have access to that kind of medicine, fistulas are unfortunately quite common. So throughout their 40-year career, Reg and Catherine focus on treating these women with fistulas. And these women come from all over the country. They walk hundreds of kilometers sometimes to get to the hospital where Catherine's working. And it's just the most unbelievable story that I've ever read. Catherine and Reg were nominated for a number of awards throughout their lifetime, including the Nobel Peace Prize, and they absolutely deserved every one. Their story is unbelievably amazing, and the amount of help and support and just love that they showed these fistula patients, these women, was just so heartwarming. I think by the end of the book, they ended up treating about 60,000 fistula patients throughout their 40-year career. And on the one hand, the fistula situation is just so heartbreaking to begin with, but it's so heartwarming to see how much help and love that Reg and Catherine were able to spread throughout their career. Like I mentioned, Catherine and Reg moved to Ethiopia in 1960, so they were there for the political upheaval that was happening during the 70s and 80s in Ethiopia. Catherine talks about a number of times where bullets entered her house because there was fighting all around the hospital that she was working at, and just basically their sheer perseverance and their determination to continue to help the fistula patients despite the unrest and upheaval that was happening all around them. Reg ended up passing away in 1993 and Catherine ended up passing away in 2020, so only a couple of years ago. Anyways, I could talk forever about this book. The point of the matter is it is incredible, uplifting, amazing. Oh, you have to read it. You absolutely have to read it. Another book that I read throughout the break is Looking for Theophrastus by Laura Beatty. This book is so sweet. Theophrastus was an ancient Greek philosopher who worked alongside Aristotle, and it's basically about Laura's quest to get to know him. Most people have heard of Aristotle, but Theophrastus has been lost to time, even though he was basically the father of botany and biology and worked alongside Aristotle to come up with the whole concept of science, really. They were the fathers of science, and I think that it's almost an injustice that he's been forgotten while Aristotle is still very much respected and revered. In this book, Laura talks about her visit to Greece in order to retrace Theophrastus' footsteps and try and see the land and the area that he would have lived in. She also talks a lot about him in a historical sense and what his life was like and his work. And she also kind of is a little bit of a philosopher herself and kind of delves into her own musings and thoughts about the past and the present, and it's half historical account of Theophrastus and life in ancient Greek and half musings on life overall. And I think it is quite a lovely book. I wouldn't recommend it if you just want the hard cold facts about Theophrastus and just want to learn the history and nothing else, but if you're into that kind of romantic, ancient storytelling kind of vibe with some history behind it as well, then this one was probably right up your alley. Another book that I read over the holidays is called The Premonitions Bureau by Sam Knight. This book was a bit wacky. I did enjoy it, but it wasn't at all what I was expecting. The Premonitions Bureau was, I guess, like a little group set up in the 1960s. And it basically ran in a newspaper and asked people to send in any premonitions that they had about any events that were going to happen in the future. For example, things like plane crashes or landslides or natural disasters. If someone had like a really intense dream or just a feeling that something bad was going to happen, they were encouraged to write in, and basically the Bureau's purpose was to see if premonitions were real. The book also follows the lives of the main people who ran the Bureau and basically how they came to set it up to begin with and what their background was. And it focuses towards the end on two people who had a number of premonitions that ended up being extremely accurate. And in the end, I won't spoil it, but there was something that they predicted that ended up coming true that was quite a bit eerie in a way. I did enjoy this book. It certainly wasn't what I was expecting, but I learned a lot about the Premonitions Bureau, which is something that I never even knew existed until I picked up this book. If you're into things like the social sciences or what social sciences were doing in the 60s and 70s, I guess, then this would definitely be of interest to you. The next book that I read over the break is Enemy of All Mankind by Stephen Johnson. What an interesting book. This book is about Captain Henry Every, who was basically the first, I guess, famous pirate of all time. He was from England in the 1600s, and he basically, amongst a few other things, mutineered an English ship and used it to intercept and steal from an Indian ship that was coming back from Mecca. The book details how much of a big deal this was at the time. I think Captain Henry and his crew ended up stealing over $25 million worth of jewels from this Indian ship. And it was at a time when India was just starting to establish its East India Company, and it really brought to a head the tensions between Britain and India and how England was really keen to hang on to their placement in India because it meant they could get so much trade, but the Indians were really pissed off that this captain had invaded their ship and stolen from them, and it was the first time where two countries had a situation and no one really knew how to resolve it. The most incredible thing, I think, as well, is that Captain Henry Every managed to steal so much wealth and ended up going back to England, even though he was a marked man, because the English government really wanted to get him. And he just kind of disappeared after this whole thing. And no one knows where he went or whether he managed to keep his wealth or what happened to him. And it's incredible that he kind of came from a background that we don't really know much about, got caught up in this massive robbery, piracy, extravaganza, and then just slipped back into the pages of history again. It was amazing. I'm not much of like a pirate, fantasy, Army Hardy's kind of story person, but this book was really, really interesting to read. It was full of action, full of intrigue, and really also gave a lot of information on the history of the East India Company and English and Indian relationships in the 1600s and how this one pirate managed to almost screw it all up. The next book that I read, I feel like I'm a little bit late to the party for. It's I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. Wow, what an interesting book. I'm so glad that I picked this one up. I'm sure a lot of you have already read it, and if you hadn't, I highly recommend it. If you don't know, Jeanette was most famous for her role in iCarly as Sam, and in this book she basically describes her relationship with her mother and how it was abusive. She talks a lot about the eating disorders that she had. She talks a lot about how controlling her mum was and how emotionally manipulative and needy her mum was. By the end, I was kind of in disbelief as to how bad the abuse from her mother was. I was actually really glad to see that by the end, Jeanette has really made a lot of progress in healing herself, healing her eating disorders, and stepping into her own wonderful, powerful adult self. It's a fantastic book. If you haven't already read it, do so. The final book that I read over the holidays is I Give My Marriage a Year by Holly Wainwright. This is a dun-dun-dun fiction book. I don't usually read fiction, but this one just caught my eye in the library, so I decided to pick it up anyway. And in fact, I picked it up because I thought it was a non-fiction book about a woman who did decide to give her marriage a year. But when I saw it was a novel, I was just like, I'll just read it anyway, give it a go. Every once in a while I enjoyed reading fiction. And I'm pleased to report that this book was good. I think I was most interested in the dynamic of a woman who is in, I guess, the final stages of her marriage, in that she's very close to a divorce. This book did go into a lot of flashbacks of the main character's, I guess, history and their initial meeting and how they were dating for a while and all the things that kind of happened to lead up to this point in this woman's marriage where she was ready to leave her husband after a year. I do wish that there was more, I guess, present time of the story where you find out more of the dynamic in the strained relationship instead of going through so much backstory and back history, but I guess you do kind of need the background in order for the present day part of the story to make sense. I won't tell you how the story ends because that would be giving away the ending, but if you're interested in, would I call it a rom-com? Yeah, I think I would. If you're interested in romance books, or if you're interested in rom-com-ish kind of books, or if you're just interested in novels about relationships and how different people, even though they may be fictitious, deal with relationships and deal with difficult times in their relationship, then I think you'll enjoy this book. So those are all the books that I read over the holidays. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're interested in picking up any of the books that I mentioned today, I'll leave a link to them on Amazon in the description box below. Thank you so much, and I'll see you again very soon. Bye!